Silas Haven had never paid attention to handwritten mail. His assistant filtered everything. Letters from charities, corporate invitations, fan mail from idealistic college students who saw him as a messianic tech genius. But that morning, something strange sat alone at the edge of his mahogany desk. A plain gray envelope, creased and slightly damp, with no return address and a postmark from some unknown Tennessee town. He wouldn't have noticed it if not for the weight, heavier than a regular note, and the fact that it smelled faintly of lavender soap. Curious, Silas peeled it open and found a single photograph and a note written in a rushed, narrow hand. The photograph froze him in place. A little girl, 7, maybe 8. Her hair was a messy chestnut brown, her cheeks dusted with freckles. She stood in front of a chalkboard that read "First Grade, Miss Jenkins," clutching a too-big backpack with a nervous half-smile. But it was her eyes that knocked the air from his lungs. That exact gray-green color he'd seen every morning in the mirror and every night, years ago, in the eyes of the only woman he'd ever truly loved. The note was only 2 sentences. "She deserves better, and you deserve to know the truth." There was no signature, no explanation, just that. Silas reread it 3 times, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A tremor ran through his hand as he stared at the photo again, this time zooming in with his phone to analyze every pixel like it was a data leak. The girl's nose was slightly crooked at the tip, just like his had been before surgery. Her left ear had that slight fold. She looked like his. He thought he'd buried that chapter long ago. Amber Rain. The name came back like a punch to the gut. She had been the one thing in his life that wasn't calculated, optimized, or planned. The poetry in his otherwise mechanical world. He met her when he was still nobody. Just another dropout trying to launch an eco-startup with duct tape and delusion. She was a waitress at a downtown bar in Austin, had a smart mouth, dimples that showed up only when she was being mean, and a way of looking at him that made him feel known. Not admired, not envied. Known. They'd lived in a tiny apartment with leaky pipes and bad neighbors. She'd made fun of his obsession with self-discipline and optimization, and he'd fallen in love with how messily human she was. And then, 5 years ago, she vanished. No message. No fight. One night she simply didn't come home. He'd called hospitals, filed reports, even hired a PI. Eventually the trail had gone cold. Everyone told him to move on. So he did, in the way successful men often do. By building an empire. He poured every ounce of grief into growing Haven Tech, expanded into sustainable housing, even made it to the cover of Forbes. And all along, something stayed broken inside him. A quiet grief he never spoke of. But now there was a child with his eyes, an Amber, somewhere in Tennessee. He picked up the envelope again and flipped it over. Nothing. Just the city name on the postmark, Meadowvale, TN, a place he'd never heard of, a 5-hour drive from Nashville. Population probably under 2,000. No airports, no chain hotels, no reason she would be there, unless she was hiding. He didn't hesitate. He canceled his afternoon meetings, rescheduled his board presentation, and told his assistant to clear his calendar until further notice. He didn't say where he was going or why. Silas packed a small bag, grabbed the photo, and got in his Tesla without a word. The highway stretched endlessly through the Texas landscape, then dipped into the wooded hills of Tennessee. As the miles passed, a storm began to build on the horizon, low and gray, like a bruise swelling across the sky. It mirrored the tightness in his chest, anticipation tangled with dread. What if the letter was a prank, a scam? What if she had a child with someone else, and someone wanted to manipulate him? But he knew. No DNA test could say more than the look in that girl's eyes. He knew. By the time he rolled into Meadowvale the next evening, the sky had opened up and rain poured in sheets. The town was as small as he'd expected. 2 traffic lights, a diner, a gas station, and a half-empty strip mall. He stopped at the only inn and paid in cash. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with cloud-white hair and a southern lilt, looked at him like she hadn't seen someone in a tailored coat in 20 years. When he asked if there was a woman named Amber Rain in town, she hesitated for just a second too long. "No idea," she lied. He noticed the glance she gave to the wall phone. Protective, wary. That confirmed it. Amber was here. That night he barely slept. He stared at the photo, memorizing every detail of the little girl's face. He traced her features with his thumb. His daughter. She had to be. He rose before dawn and began driving through the side roads of Meadowvale, scanning street signs, house numbers, anything. He felt like a madman. Then around 7 a.m., he spotted it. A small rundown trailer near the edge of town, surrounded by high grass and a rusting bicycle on its side. A battered blue sedan sat in the dirt driveway. And on the porch, through the rain-smeared glass, he saw a flash of motion. A little girl. She wore an oversized t-shirt that reached past her knees and was dragging a mop across the warped wooden floor. She was wiping her eyes, crying. Silas's heart cracked. He stepped out of the car into the rain and walked toward the porch. The air smelled like wet earth and old pine. His shoes sank into the mud with each step. The girl heard the creak of the wood and looked up at him. It was like watching a mirror become flesh. He froze. She did too. He wanted to speak, but no words came. Behind him, a door slammed open. "Get away from her!" Amber's voice. The same voice that once whispered into his neck and laughed at his bad jokes. But now it was sharp, afraid, like an animal cornered. She stepped out, soaked to the skin, holding a towel in one hand and a small paring knife in the other. Her eyes wild. He turned to her slowly. "Amber," he said, voice breaking. "Is she mine?" And just like that, everything he thought he left behind came roaring back. Amber stood barefoot on the porch, rain soaking through her threadbare t-shirt, chest rising and falling like she'd run a mile uphill. Her hand trembled slightly around the handle of the paring knife, but her stance was rigid, protective. The towel she had in the other hand slipped to the floor unnoticed. Silas, standing just 3 feet away, didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't even blink. He simply looked at her, soaked, stunned, hollowed out by memories and too many unanswered questions, and repeated softer this time, "Is she mine?" For a moment, time paused. The storm behind them rumbled across the Tennessee sky, but the space between them felt quiet, like the earth was holding its breath. Amber didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at the little girl inside, who had stepped back from the doorway and was now half hidden behind a stained curtain. The child was peeking out, clinging to the mop like it could keep her grounded. Amber's eyes flicked back to Silas, and for the first time in years, their gazes locked without a filter of time, silence, or distance. She saw what he saw, the pain, the disbelief, the fragile hope that had no right to still exist. "Come inside," she said finally, voice low and ragged. She lowered the knife, stepped back, and pushed the screen door open with her shoulder. Silas hesitated for just a beat before stepping through the door. The house smelled like mildew and burned coffee. The living room was cramped, filled with mismatched furniture that looked like it had been salvaged from different garage sales. A battered couch with a blanket thrown over a torn cushion. A cheap plastic table that wobbled under the weight of unopened mail. A few crayons scattered across the floor. The little girl was gone, probably tucked away in one of the back rooms. Silas felt his chest tighten again. Amber closed the door behind them and threw the knife into the sink like it burned her. Her movements were jerky, mechanical, like her body was acting while her brain was still trying to process that he was standing here. Alive. Real. Looking at her with that same expression he wore the night she'd left without goodbye. She didn't sit down, and neither did he. Instead, she leaned against the counter and folded her arms, like armor across her chest. She wiped a wet strand of hair from her cheek with the back of her hand. "I was gonna tell you," she began, then shook her head immediately, correcting herself. "No, that's a lie. I wasn't. I didn't want you to know." Silas took a slow step forward. "Why?" "Because you would have come for her," she said. "And you don't know what that would have meant back then." He stared at her, trying to make sense of the fear in her voice. "You think I would have hurt her?" "No," Amber said sharply, shaking her head. "No, never. You would have loved her. That's what terrified me." She pushed off the counter now and paced the length of the small kitchen, her bare feet slapping softly against the old linoleum floor. "If you had known, if I'd told you, you'd have come. You'd have taken care of both of us. But it wouldn't have been safe." "Safe from what?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "Amber, what the hell happened to you?" She stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes rimmed with dark circles, her body thinner than he remembered. She looked exhausted, like someone who had been running in place for years. You remember Lucas Rhodes? She asked. And Silas's memory flickered to a name they both used to say like a joke. A guy from her past who once dealt pills behind the bar where she worked. After I left Austin, I didn't have anywhere to go. I was pregnant, scared out of my mind, and my brother, he was into some bad shit. He told Lucas, thought maybe he'd help out, give me a place to stay for a while. That was the deal. She laughed bitterly. Lucas didn't want to help. He wanted leverage. Silas's fists clenched at his sides. What do you mean? Amber's voice grew quieter. He figured out who the baby's father was. Saw a news article about you after you got funding for your first solar plant. All of a sudden, I wasn't just a broke pregnant girl. I was an asset. A way to get to you. Or your money. I told him if he tried anything, I'd go to the police. He laughed in my face. Said no one would believe a junkie sister with a record and no job. Silas's eyes burned. Jesus, Amber. She nodded. I got out. Took what little cash I had and ran before she was born. Changed my name for a while. Found this place because no one comes here unless they're lost. He looked around the room again. The broken floor tiles, the mold in the ceiling corners, the silence. It wasn't just poverty, it was isolation. This wasn't where someone lived. It was where someone hid. You should have called me, he said, not with anger, but with heartbreak. Amber gave him a long, heavy look. Would you have believed me? After all that silence? After I disappeared without a word? You would have thought I wanted something. Money, attention, maybe even custody. No, he whispered. I would have believed you, because I loved you. That stopped her cold. Her shoulders sagged like the words weighed more than she expected. She leaned against the fridge, both hands behind her on the handle, gripping it like it might keep her upright. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, she said, Her name is Iris. Silas swallowed hard. She's 7. She likes numbers and puzzles. She gets quiet when she's nervous. And sometimes when she's scared, she hums to herself. Songs she makes up on the spot. They never rhyme, but they're always beautiful. He almost couldn't breathe. Can I see her? Amber hesitated. I'm not here to take her from you, he added quickly. I need to know her. I missed 7 years. 7 years, Amber. That's not something I can pretend never happened. She studied his face for a long time, searching for something. Then she turned and walked down the narrow hallway without a word. A few seconds later, she returned, a small figure trailing behind her, clutching a stuffed rabbit by one ear. Iris looked up at him, cautious but curious. Her voice was soft. Are you the man from the picture? Silas knelt down, his throat tightening. What picture? She pointed to the photo he'd brought, the one Amber must have shown her, despite everything. I think you're my dad, she said, like she was saying the sky might be blue. Silas didn't cry. He couldn't. The tears stopped somewhere deep in his chest, drowned out by something bigger, heavier, and more permanent. He reached out a hand, not touching her, just offering it, palm up. I hope I am, he said gently, because I've been looking for you for a long, long time. And Iris, after a moment, stepped forward and placed her small hand in his. Amber had always known this moment might come, but she never imagined how slowly the air would feel moving through her lungs when it did. She sat at the edge of the couch, her hands wrapped tightly around a chipped mug of black coffee gone lukewarm, staring across the small living room at Silas, who had taken the only armchair in the house. Iris had gone to bed a few hours earlier, after a shy and quiet dinner of boxed mac and cheese and carrot sticks. She didn't speak much but kept looking between the two of them with a kind of silent calculation, like she was doing the math on a question she didn't know how to ask yet. Amber had kissed her daughter's forehead and tucked her in without a word, and now the house had fallen into a deep, pulsing quiet. Silas hadn't touched his tea. It sat untouched on the side table, forgotten in the weight of what hung between them. The only light came from the crooked floor lamp near the couch, flickering every so often like it was remembering how to die. Outside, the rain had turned to a slow, rhythmic drizzle, the kind that soaked the world and made everything feel like it was being washed clean. But inside, nothing felt clean. It felt raw and exposed. She finally broke the silence. You want me to explain it all now, don't you? He didn't nod or shake his head. He just looked at her, eyes unreadable but wide open, like he didn't want to miss a single word she said. That was always how he listened. Like he was taking notes, not out of formality, but reverence. She hated that she still noticed things like that. She took a breath, long and trembling. The day I left Austin, I was already pregnant. I hadn't told you yet because I was still trying to convince myself it was real. I was 2 months along, maybe 3, and I was terrified. Not of you, never of you, but of everything else. I would have taken care of you, he said quietly, his voice low but not sharp. You know that. Amber gave a bitter little laugh, not mocking but pained. That's exactly what scared me. You would have tried to fix it. You always fix things. Even people. Especially people. And I didn't want to be your project, Silas. I didn't want to be something you rescued. I wouldn't have seen it that way. No, you wouldn't have. But I would have. And that would have killed me slowly. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking, so she gripped the mug tighter, hoping the heat would anchor her. My brother had just been arrested. You remember Shane? He got caught moving pills between Austin and El Paso. DEA was involved. I got pulled into questioning. They thought I might be helping him launder money through the bar, which was bullshit. But try proving that when you've got $12 in your checking account and the same last name as the guy they've been tracking for a year. She rubbed her forehead, the memory hitting her like a fresh wave of salt water. I thought it would blow over, but Shane made a deal, a bad one. He named names and owed favors to the kind of people you don't say no to. I was one of those favors. That's when Lucas showed up. Silas stiffened slightly at the name. She noticed but didn't stop. He told me he could keep me safe, said he had connections, said he'd keep me off the radar. But there was a price. I had to disappear. No calls, no visits, no forwarding address. I had to pretend I'd never existed. Amber stared at the wall like she could burn a hole through it. I stayed with him for 4 months. He never hit me, but it was worse in some ways. He was like a shadow that curled around my life. I couldn't breathe without wondering if he was watching. He'd tell me when I could leave the house, what I could buy, who I could look at. And when I started to show, he got possessive, like I was carrying something that belonged to him. And when he found out who the father was, that you were on your way to becoming a tech god, his entire tone changed. He started making calls, asked questions. One night I heard him on the phone telling someone he was going to cash in soon. Silas's jaw flexed, his hands white-knuckled on the arms of the chair. He didn't interrupt, but his silence was heavy. Amber continued, her voice tightening. I packed what I could in the middle of the night. Took a Greyhound 3 states east with no ID and no plan. I was 6 months pregnant and terrified out of my mind. Ended up in a women's shelter in Kentucky. Gave birth there. They were kind to me. Gave me a fake name to use. I picked Amber Rain as a joke because it sounded poetic, and I didn't think I'd ever deserve anything poetic again. She looked at him now, tears at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Meadowvale was just a stop. I thought I'd stay a week, but the town was quiet, anonymous. No one asked questions. I got a job at the diner, then another cleaning houses. I kept my head down. I raised Iris alone. And every time I thought of calling you, I stopped myself. Because I knew the second you heard her voice, you'd come. And then it wouldn't be just her life I'd changed. It would be yours. Silas leaned forward slightly, his eyes glossy now, his voice just above a whisper. You should have given me the chance to make that choice. I know, she said. I know that now. But back then, I was just trying to survive. There was another silence, but it felt different. Not the kind that closed doors, the kind that opened them, slowly, painfully, with both people unsure what they might find on the other side. Silas stood and crossed the room. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her. His voice cracked a little when he spoke. I want to be in her life, whatever that looks like. I don't care how long it takes or what you need from me. She's my daughter, and you were never a project, Amber. You were my heart. You still are. Amber looked up, her lips parting like she might say something, but no words came. Just a look so filled with exhaustion, apology, and that faint shimmer of something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Hope. She stood slowly, brushing past him as she walked to the window. Outside, the sky had cleared. Mist hung low over the hills. A pale stripe of moonlight spilled over the trailer yard. Amber rested her forehead against the glass, her voice quiet. She hums to herself when she's scared because I used to sing to her when we were hiding. I made up lullabies. I told her they were magic, that if she sang softly enough, no one bad could hear her. Silas moved closer, not touching her yet, just standing beside her, shoulder to shoulder. She shouldn't have had to grow up like that, he said. Amber shook her head slowly. No, but maybe she doesn't have to keep growing up that way. They stood like that for a while. Two broken people slowly realizing they might not be shattered forever. The following week unfolded like something between a slow unraveling and the beginning of a delicate restoration. Silas remained in Meadowvale, renting a short-term place on the edge of town, an aging cottage with uneven floors, faded wallpaper, and a wood-burning stove that smoked if you didn't open the damper just right. It wasn't glamorous, but he liked the quiet, the space, the way the hills wrapped around the property like folded arms. It reminded him, in some strange way, of Amber's silence the first few days after he arrived. Closed in, braced for disappointment. Amber didn't forbid him from seeing Iris, but she didn't fully invite him either. There were boundaries and he respected them, partly out of guilt, partly because he understood just how much damage could be done by entering a child's life too quickly or too carelessly. Every day he met Iris at the little park by the laundromat, where the town's only slide was half rust and the swings creaked like old bones. He brought puzzles, simple science kits, and notebooks filled with mazes he'd printed out the night before. Iris was cautious at first, but curious, always watching him from under her lashes, tilting her head the same way Amber used to when she didn't trust something but wanted to. On the fourth day, she asked him if space was real. He laughed and said, "More real than most things." She nodded thoughtfully as if confirming a theory. "Do you think people live on other planets?" He leaned forward on the park bench, elbows on knees. "Maybe not people like us, but I think there's something. Maybe someone looking back. Like a mirror? Maybe, but a really, really far away one." Iris nodded again, then looked up at him and asked the question he'd been waiting for. "Are you really my dad?" He didn't flinch, didn't dramatize it, didn't launch into a speech. He simply nodded. "Yes, I am." She didn't speak for a long time after that. She just swung gently, dragging the tips of her sneakers in the dirt. Then with the most casual grace in the world, she hopped off the swing, walked over to him, and handed him the lopsided bracelet she had made out of beads and elastic string the day before. "It's not magic," she said, "but I made it." He took it like it was an heirloom. Later that evening, Silas sat across from Amber in her tiny kitchen, showing her the bracelet like it was proof of something sacred. She smiled despite herself, though it didn't fully reach her eyes. She had been watching him and Iris through the window earlier, pretending to fold laundry while her daughter asked questions about constellations. She had seen the way Silas didn't try to charm his way in or buy her love, but instead sat still when she needed space and listened with the kind of attention that people rarely give children unless they truly care. "I didn't expect her to take to you so quickly," Amber admitted, sipping her tea. "I didn't expect anything," he replied. "I didn't even expect you to let me stay." Her gaze softened, but only a little. "I almost didn't, but I kept thinking, maybe she should know what it feels like to be looked at that way. Like she matters more than someone's next shift or bills or court hearing." Silas reached into his bag and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table toward her. "I need to ask you something." Amber didn't touch it. She stared at it like it might bite her. "What is it?" "A paternity test," he said quietly. "I already did my part. I didn't want to take her without asking. I'd never do that to her, or you, but I needed something official, just in case Lucas ever shows up again. I need to be ready." Amber swallowed, her throat moving visibly. "And?" "Iris is mine, 100%. The words landed heavily between them. She finally picked up the envelope, opened it, and stared at the paperwork inside. The legalese, the signatures, the data. Black and white truth on government letterhead. She ran her thumb over the top of the page, then set it down gently like she was placing a flower on a grave. "I knew," she said. "I always knew. But part of me thought maybe the test would say otherwise. And then you'd leave. and it would be over. Is that what you want? He asked, voice steady but not accusing. She shook her head. I don't know what I want, Silas. I've spent so long just reacting to things, dodging fires, getting by. I don't know what it means to make choices for the future anymore. Well, he said, leaning forward, maybe it's time you started. She looked at him again, this time longer. There was something building behind her expression, a storm gathering in slow, reluctant clouds. You think it's that easy? That I can just hand over the last 7 years and say, here, take a piece of this life I barely held together? Do you have any idea what it was like to look at her every morning and see you in her smile, her posture, even her stubbornness, and know you weren't coming? I didn't know, he said sharply. You made sure I didn't know. Amber stood, pushing her chair back with a scrape. Because I had to. Because you had a world waiting for you, and I had nothing. I couldn't drag you down into my mess. I would have gone willingly, Silas said. I still would. But now it's not about you or me. It's about her. So what happens next isn't about guilt or fear or pride. It's about Iris. Her shoulders slumped. She looked suddenly small, like she was trying to shrink into her own body. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest and leaned against the counter. The silence between them stretched again, but this time it was warmer, less jagged. She likes you, Amber said finally. I haven't seen her laugh that way since she was a baby. Not that unguarded. I want to give her more of that, Silas replied. Not as a visitor. Not just on weekends. I want to be in her life for good. No conditions. Amber didn't answer immediately. She stood there for a long time, staring out the window at the dark yard, where a porch light flickered and insects danced like stars. You really stayed, she said quietly. You really came here, and you stayed. I'm not leaving, he said. Not again. Not unless you tell me to. She finally turned, eyes tired but not hardened. Then don't just stay for her. Stay for all of us. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. For the first time in years, something like relief broke across his face. Not victory, not triumph. Just the quiet, exhausted, holy release of a man who had spent too long chasing a ghost and finally found a living, breathing reason to believe again. That night, as he walked back to his rented cottage, Silas looked up at the sky. The stars above Meadowvale were clearer than he remembered stars ever being. Maybe he'd just forgotten how to look. The following month unfolded with a kind of cautious rhythm, like two people learning how to waltz after years of walking with a limp. Silas became a presence in Iris's world, not as a guest, not as a novelty, but as someone whose shadow appeared beside hers when she traced figures in the dirt with her sneakers. He walked her to school some mornings, helped with her reading at night, and learned quickly that she preferred to whisper questions rather than ask them aloud. Her trust didn't explode into being. It arrived in glances, in small offerings of silence, in a light touch to his arm when she was too tired to speak. Amber watched it all with the same mix of awe and apprehension she hadn't been able to shake since the day Silas showed up. He was patient, careful, never trying to take up too much space in the beginning. But his presence had weight, like gravity, changing the way everything around them moved. For the first time in years, Amber found herself thinking in terms of more than survival. She caught herself wondering things like how they might rebuild, not just patch. She began doing things slowly, thoughtfully, cooking meals from scratch, fixing broken hinges, unpacking boxes that had been taped shut since Iris was in diapers. Things she had once convinced herself she didn't have time or energy to care about. But shadows, even when pushed to the corners, don't disappear. It started one Sunday afternoon in early fall. The sun had dipped behind a cluster of pine trees, casting long, golden fingers of light across the porch. Iris was inside, drawing what she called constellation maps with colored pencils while Amber and Silas sat outside, sipping lemonade and talking about nothing in particular. Silas was mid-sentence, telling her about a solar-powered water purification project he'd helped fund in Ghana when Amber's phone buzzed. She didn't recognize the number. It was a local area code. She answered anyway. The voice on the other end was low, familiar, and full of venom that had aged badly. Well, the runaway finally picked up the phone. Amber's spine stiffened. Her breath caught. Silas immediately noticed the shift in her expression, sitting forward in his chair with an alertness that came from instinct more than understanding. Lucas, she said, barely above a whisper. That's right. Thought I'd give you a courtesy call. Saw something interesting last week. Imagine my surprise when I'm driving past the old Shell station and see you and your little brat walking hand in hand with some hotshot in a tailored jacket. Thought you didn't have any more secrets left, Amber. Her blood turned to ice. She stepped off the porch and walked into the yard, away from Iris's ears. Silas followed her with his eyes, unmoving, his body coiled like a wire ready to snap. What do you want? Amber said, her voice flat, mechanical. Her heart was thundering. Her fingers trembled around the phone, but she forced herself not to show it in her voice. Oh, I think you know what I want. I want what's mine. And last I checked, I'm still listed as Iris's legal father. Remember that little courthouse wedding? That paperwork you signed? I kept it all neat and tidy just in case. Amber closed her eyes, rage and panic clawing at her throat. You haven't seen her in 7 years. And whose fault is that? Lucas replied with a snarl. You ran. You took her. You made me look like a fool. But now that the girl's daddy is a tech billionaire with a few $1 billion burning a hole in his back pocket, well, suddenly she's a whole lot more valuable than a few food stamps and a sad little trailer. Amber's legs nearly buckled. Her mind scrambled. He couldn't possibly. I'm filing for custody, he continued smug. Partial, at least. I'll say you're unstable, unfit, and I've got people willing to back me up. But I'm a reasonable man, Amber. Give me what I'm owed, and maybe I disappear again. Real quiet. Silas had risen and walked down the steps now. He didn't need to hear the words to know what kind of conversation this was. He could see it in the way Amber's face had gone pale and rigid. She ended the call without saying goodbye, hands clenched around the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. Tell me, he said simply. She didn't speak. She just stood there shivering even though it wasn't cold, staring at the trees like if she looked hard enough she might burn them down. He's going to file for custody, she said eventually, her voice numb. He still has the paperwork from when we were married. And Iris, legally he's still down as her father. Not you. Silas didn't curse, didn't shout. Instead, he took a slow breath and said, We'll fix it. We'll go through the courts. File for paternity rights. Have you removed him as guardian? Amber turned toward him, eyes wide and afraid. Silas, he knows how to twist things. He'll lie, forge statements, get people to testify. He's done it before. And if we go public, if this becomes some big fight, Iris will get dragged into it. People will talk. Reporters might find us. I don't want her to be some headline. She's not going to be, he said firmly. I won't let that happen. They stood in silence for a moment before Amber finally said, We need help. 2 days later, they drove to Nashville to meet with a lawyer Silas had worked with during a hostile acquisition years earlier. Her name was Yvonne Hargrave, mid-60s, sharp as a tack, and entirely unimpressed by money, which made her the perfect person to trust. She didn't smile when she read the summary. She didn't offer false comfort. Custody battles involving presumed fathers are messy. If Lucas Rhodes is still listed on the birth certificate, he has legal rights. The marriage, even if unofficially annulled or ended by desertion, complicates it further. But Silas has a DNA test, Amber said, her voice tight. Yvonne nodded. Which helps, but it doesn't erase history, especially in a state like this. If Lucas wants to fight dirty, he can slow the process down, make life miserable. Silas leaned forward. So what do? We don't give him time, Yvonne said. We file preemptively. Petition to establish paternity. Request emergency temporary custody under the grounds that Lucas has had no involvement or financial support for 7 years. We document everything. Amber's housing, school records, Iris's routine. Show the court she's stable, safe, thriving, and we collect any and all dirt you've got on Lucas. Every missed payment, every threat, every contact. Amber's hands were clenched in her lap. And if we lose? Yvonne looked at her for a long time, then said, We don't. That night back in Meadowvale, Amber sat on the porch steps, knees drawn to her chest. Silas brought her a blanket and sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The stars were coming out one by one in quiet procession. Finally, Amber whispered, I was never going to tell you. I was going to keep it all buried forever. I thought that was the only way to keep her safe. Silas looked at her, eyes soft but resolute. Maybe it was, but now we're not running anymore. were standing together. And in that moment, with the crickets humming in the trees and the night stretching out around them like a promise, Amber leaned into him, not for warmth, not for comfort, but because somewhere deep inside, she believed him. For the first time in 7 years, she wasn't alone. The courthouse in Nashville looked like any other brick and stone government building, sterile, symmetrical, built more for function than comfort. But as Amber stepped through the glass doors, her knees almost gave out. The sound of her boots against the marble echoed too loudly in her ears, and the fluorescent lighting above felt like it was revealing every mistake she'd ever made. Silas walked beside her in a dark, understated suit, hand hovering near hers but not quite touching it. He knew better than to press too close right now. She needed space to breathe. Still, his presence grounded her like an anchor. Even in the chaos of her mind, she could feel his quiet steadiness. Iris was with Yvonne's paralegal in a separate room across the hallway, coloring in a book with thick pages and a pack of fresh markers that Silas had brought from a bookstore the night before. Amber had kissed her daughter's head 3 times before letting her go, whispering that she'd be back soon and that everything would be okay. It wasn't a promise, just a hope clinging to her like a prayer. Now standing outside the courtroom, Amber could feel that promise unraveling in her chest with every passing second. Yvonne arrived moments later, brisk and efficient as always, carrying a black binder full of statements, legal precedents, and copies of every document they'd filed. She nodded once to Amber, once to Silas, then opened the courtroom door without ceremony and led them in. Lucas Rhodes was already there. He sat like a man who believed the world owed him something. Elbows wide, one leg stretched out, his suit a cheap charcoal gray that bunched at the shoulders and shone under the lights from overwear. He didn't look at Amber at first. He kept his gaze locked on Silas, a smug smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The kind of smile that had haunted her nightmares for years. It wasn't gloating. It was predatory, a reminder that he had no shame, no conscience, just leverage and the arrogance of a man who knew the system often favored the bold, even if they were cruel. Silas didn't respond to the look. His face remained neutral, lips pressed into a line, eyes unreadable. The judge entered shortly after, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for no-nonsense decisions and a strong stance on child welfare. Yvonne had specifically filed to have her preside. The proceedings began with formal introductions, legal jargon, the exchange of initial statements. Yvonne stood and laid out the case clearly. A mother fleeing domestic intimidation, a biological father unaware of his child's existence until recently, and a man listed on the birth certificate who had made no attempts at contact or support in 7 years. She emphasized Iris's well-being, her performance in school, her emotional growth since reconnecting with Silas. She presented the DNA results, school records, a psychological letter from a child counselor affirming that abrupt changes in custody could be traumatic. Every piece was stacked neatly like a carefully set chessboard. Lucas's attorney, a slick, fast-talking man in a patterned tie, countered with an argument designed to poke holes in Amber's credibility. He called her a runaway, accused her of forgery, deception, parental alienation. He claimed Lucas had no idea where she had gone and was heartbroken over the years he had missed. He read from a statement supposedly written by Lucas himself, full of flowery regret and claims of redemption. Amber sat rigid, jaw clenched so hard her teeth hurt. Then they called witnesses. Lucas brought in 2 people, an old landlord who claimed Amber had left without notice, and a former waitress from the diner where Amber had worked, who testified, uncomfortably, that Amber was always nervous and didn't talk much, which Lucas's lawyer twisted into evidence of instability. Amber wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and tell the truth, that she had been terrified, that the quiet was survival, not madness. But she remained silent, hands folded in her lap, waiting for her turn. Finally, Yvonne stood and called Silas to testify. He walked to the stand calmly, every step careful and precise. When asked to state his name and occupation, he did so without embellishment. The judge asked if he understood the implications of petitioning for parental rights. "I do," he said. "What is your relationship with the child, Iris?" Yvonne asked. Silas looked straight ahead. "I am her biological father. I didn't know she existed until a month ago. Since then, I've spent every possible moment getting to know her, caring for her, listening to her. I don't want to replace anyone. I only want to be the father she deserves. And what do you believe that entails? It means staying, even when it's hard. It means being there when she's afraid, showing up at school events, knowing what kind of stories she likes before bed. It means teaching her the difference between being strong and being loud, and protecting her from anything that would make her feel small. Lucas's attorney objected, citing emotional manipulation, but the judge allowed the statement to stand. Then Amber was called. She hadn't planned to speak. She'd wanted to remain a shadow in this room, but when she took the stand, the world seemed to narrow to a single point. She spoke softly but clearly, her voice steady only because she wouldn't allow herself to shake. I left because I was scared, she said. Not of Silas, never of him. I was scared of what the people around me were capable of. I was scared for my daughter. Lucas didn't threaten me once. He made it a routine. He controlled me in small, constant ways. He never hit me, but I lived like I was waiting for it. She paused, breath shaking, then continued. I didn't tell Silas because I thought it would destroy everything he was building. He had a future. I had a panic attack every time the phone rang. I thought keeping Iris to myself was protecting her. I see now that it wasn't fair, but I never once regretted loving her. The room was still. The final testimony came from Iris. They had agreed it would only happen if the judge felt it was necessary, and apparently she did. Iris sat in a chair much too large for her, swinging her legs slightly, wearing the same bracelet she'd given Silas weeks before. The judge asked gentle questions. Iris answered them with the cautious honesty of a child who had been taught to observe carefully before speaking. When asked who she wanted to live with, she looked down at her shoes for a long time. Then she said, "My mom and my real dad, not the one who yells in the phone." The judge nodded, thanked her, and asked if she wanted to say anything else. Iris hesitated, then looked at Lucas for the first time. Her voice was soft. "You're scary," she said, "and I don't want to be scared all the time." Lucas's face twitched, but he didn't say a word. His attorney looked like he was already planning an appeal. The judge called for a brief recess. When they returned, she delivered her verdict. Silas Haven was granted full paternity rights. Amber retained full physical and legal custody. Lucas Rhodes's parental rights were terminated based on willful abandonment and psychological harm. There was no celebration in the room, only the quiet, stunned release of breath from Amber as she felt her world begin to loosen at the seams in the best possible way. As they exited the courthouse, the late afternoon sun bathed the city in golden light. Iris clung to Silas's hand while Amber walked just beside them, silent but smiling. For the first time in 7 years, the world didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning. The days following the court's decision moved with an unfamiliar gentleness, as if the world had finally decided to exhale alongside them. Autumn stretched fully into the hills of Meadowvale, coating the trees in shades of copper and flame, the air crisp with promise. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect. There were still bills to pay, memories that stung, and the quiet moments when Amber would wake up with her chest tight and her breath caught halfway. But something had changed. There was no longer a question mark hovering over each morning. For the first time in years, she wasn't living in the shadow of escape. She was living in the open, her name no longer a shield, but her own. Silas stayed. He didn't announce it, didn't make a grand gesture. He just stayed. He continued renting the little cottage down the road, but more often than not, he was at Amber's place. He fixed the back porch steps that had always sagged in the middle, repaired the heating vent in Iris's room, and installed a light fixture in the kitchen that didn't buzz like a beehive. He brought groceries without asking, made dinner while Amber helped Iris with homework, and read from a stack of books each night before bed. Sometimes when Iris had already fallen asleep, Amber would find him still sitting at the edge of the bed, quietly watching her breathe, as if trying to memorize the sound of peace. There was a rhythm to this new life, built not on grand declarations, but on the accumulation of small kindnesses. Warm socks in the laundry, coffee set to brew at 6:30, a sticky note with a joke left on the bathroom mirror. The sort of things people in love do when they're not trying to prove anything. Silas didn't push. He didn't ask Amber for answers she wasn't ready to give. He simply gave her space, consistency, and a quiet invitation to trust again. It was one of those cold evenings, November creeping in early with frost on the windows and firewood stacked by the back door, when something finally shifted between them. Iris had fallen asleep early, worn out from a school field trip to the botanical gardens. The house was quiet except for the low crackle of the fireplace and the sound of water dripping rhythmically from the kitchen faucet. Amber stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, her thoughts a tangle of memories and half-formed questions. Silas walked in holding 2 mugs of tea. He offered one without a word and stood beside her, both of them looking out into the darkness that blanketed the yard. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, and the branches rustled softly in the breeze. "I keep thinking about all the versions of this life we never got to live," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the confession. "The one where I told you from the start, the one where we raised her in that little apartment with the broken sink, the one where you never had to wonder, what if?" Silas didn't respond right away. He sipped his tea, then said, "I thought about those versions too, more than I should have. But none of them would have made us who we are now. None of them would have made Iris who she is. We got here the long way, Amber. But we got here." She looked over at him. His profile was calm, but his eyes were fixed on the glass, reflecting not the yard outside, but something further, something more internal. He set his mug down and turned to her, voice low. "I meant what I said in court. I don't want to replace anything or rewrite the past. I just want to build from here. With you. With her, if you'll let me." Amber opened her mouth to speak but stopped. She realized in that moment how hard it was to accept something good when you've spent so many years preparing for it to vanish. The habit of heartbreak didn't disappear just because someone offered something better. But Silas wasn't asking her to leap. He was simply asking her to stop running. Instead of answering, she reached up and touched the collar of his shirt, smoothing it gently, letting her fingers rest just below the hollow of his throat. Then she leaned in, not out of impulse or confusion, but with a certainty that surprised even her. Their kiss wasn't cinematic. It wasn't explosive. It was something quieter, deeper. It was a homecoming. A reunion not just of lips, but of time, forgiveness, and things that had been broken and rebuilt slowly, day by day. When they pulled apart, her forehead rested against his, and neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Later that night, after the fire had gone to embers and the house lay quiet once more, Amber lay awake beside him, watching the way the shadows played across the ceiling. She thought about the girl she'd been, the one who had vanished with a bus ticket and a stomach full of fear, and how distant she felt from that version of herself now. Not because the fear was gone, but because she had chosen finally to stop letting it rule her. Silas shifted beside her, still half asleep. He reached out, as if sensing her thoughts, and took her hand without opening his eyes. She watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his brow furrowed even in sleep, and whispered so softly it felt like a wish. "I missed you." He didn't answer, but his fingers tightened slightly around hers, and that was enough. The next morning, the first frost of the season had left a delicate lacework across the front lawn. Iris ran outside in her pajamas and boots, squealing with delight as she traced patterns in the icy grass with her fingers. Amber watched from the window, Silas standing just behind her, a hand resting gently on her back. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't grand, but it was love. Real, quiet, lasting. The kind of love that didn't need to be declared every minute because it was already present in everything. The way they moved through the world together, the way their voices softened when Iris spoke, the way Amber's laughter had begun to return too, her body like a song she thought she'd forgotten. There were still things to work through. They knew that. The past didn't disappear just because the future opened its arms. But for the first time in years, Amber wasn't afraid of what came next. She welcomed it. Whatever it was, she wouldn't be alone. Winter in Meadowvale was softer than the kind of harsh, bone-deep cold Silas had grown used to in northern cities. Here, snow came in gentle flurries, layering rooftops like a quiet promise. Streets slowed down, people lingered longer in grocery stores just to share small talk, and the town took on the feel of something suspended in time. For the first time in years, Silas found himself waking without urgency. The emails still piled up on his phone. His team still sent updates from his corporate headquarters in Austin, and investors still tried to pin down video calls. But all of that felt distant now, no longer the center of his world, just orbiting pieces of a life he'd outgrown without realizing it. Amber had changed too. It wasn't dramatic. There was no makeover, no lightning strike transformation, but something in her had softened, Not into fragility, but into openness. She walked taller. She laughed easier. She no longer flinched at unexpected knocks on the door. She started painting again, small canvases at first, then a mural on the wall in Iris's room that turned into a galaxy. Stars and swirls of purple and gold and deep indigo. When Iris asked what it was, Amber said, "It's what the inside of your mind looks like." The little girl had stared at it for a long time, then said, "I like living in there." By February, Silas had officially bought the cottage down the road and began drawing up plans to build an energy-efficient home nearby, one with space for a garden and a studio and wide windows that let in the morning light. But he stayed most nights at Amber's anyway. The space between them had disappeared, not from habit or need, but because it finally made sense to be close. The day everything changed for good began like any other. The sun rose early, casting pale gold light across the frost-covered fields. Silas made pancakes, slightly burned at the edges the way Iris liked them, and Amber read aloud from the local newspaper, mocking the horoscopes. Iris had a play date planned with a girl from her class, and Amber was preparing to paint the last corner of the mural. It wasn't supposed to be a day worth remembering, but that afternoon as Silas walked Amber through a cleared patch of land where the new house would stand, just past the ridge near the old walnut tree, he paused mid-sentence and turned to face her. She'd been pointing at where the vegetable beds should go, her hands stained with charcoal from her sketchbook. He looked at her for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out something small and velvet-wrapped. She blinked, then blinked again, not quite ready to believe what she was seeing. He didn't drop to one knee. There was no rehearsed speech. He just held the box between them and said, "I don't need perfect. I don't need easy. I just need real. And you, Amber Rain, are the realest thing I've ever known. I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Amber's hand flew to her mouth. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then slowly she stepped forward, tears gathering in her eyes, and whispered, "I never thought anyone would ask me that without trying to own me." Silas smiled, voice low and steady. "I'm not trying to own anything. I just want to be part of the story you're still writing." She kissed him then, before even saying yes, because the answer had been written in every day they'd spent rebuilding this life. Later, when they walked back hand in hand, Iris spotted the ring immediately and let out a shriek that echoed down the road. "You're getting married?" she asked, eyes wide. "Like, in a dress and everything?" Amber grinned, tears still drying on her cheeks. "If I can find one that doesn't make me look like a wedding cake." They didn't plan a big wedding. They didn't need to. Spring came slowly that year, like it knew it was arriving for something sacred. The ceremony was held in the clearing by the walnut tree, with the mural from Iris's room recreated in hanging paper lanterns and painted stones. The town came, because in places like Meadowvale, people show up for joy the way they do for funerals. Iris wore a crown of wildflowers and carried the rings, which she almost dropped in the grass before catching herself with a sheepish grin. Amber wore a dress the color of moonlight, simple and soft, and Silas wore a navy suit with his sleeves rolled halfway up because it was too warm for jackets. When the officiant asked if they wanted to share vows, Amber nodded and stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but her hands were steady as she said, "I didn't grow up believing in safe places. I believed in instincts, in escape plans. But somehow, with you, I stopped looking for exits. You gave me a home not made of walls, but of moments. And I don't want to run anymore. I want to build. With you." Silas's eyes brimmed, and when it was his turn, he said, "I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought it came in numbers, awards, buildings with my name on the door. But I didn't know anything until I saw a little girl holding a mop and crying in a doorway. You gave me a reason to stop building for strangers and start building for family." They kissed under a sky that looked like it had been painted just for them. Soft blues, streaks of gold, and the first pink of spring. The reception was held on the grass, with tables borrowed from neighbors, and music played on an old Bluetooth speaker. Kids chased each other between trees, adults drank cider and laughed around fire pits, and Amber and Silas danced slowly to a song neither of them had ever heard before, but somehow knew the rhythm of anyway. At some point in the evening, Iris stood on a crate and tapped her fork against a glass. "I have a toast," she said, her voice loud and proud. "To my mom and my dad. I don't know what being married really means, but I think it means they're going to stay. And that means we can all stay." Everyone clapped, but Amber felt her heart ache with the weight and wonder of her daughter's words. That night, after the last lantern had flickered out and the guests had gone home, Silas carried Iris, fast asleep in her flower crown, into the house. Amber followed, barefoot, her dress stained at the hem from dancing. They stood together at the doorway of their new home, holding their daughter, looking out at the quiet land that had held so much of their pain and now carried the weight of something else entirely. Peace, hard-earned and honest. Silas turned to Amber and said, "We made it." She nodded, eyes glistening, voice quiet but full. "We did more than make it," she said. "We came back to life." And the night wrapped around them like a blanket, soft and whole and full of stars.